And I suppose with that, we bring down the music a little bit and bring up the camera and say, welcome everyone to another Sunday night edition of Accessibly Live, the book club reading room. Hope everyone's had a good week this week, or if you're watching this on a Monday, hope you're having this and every day a good week this week. I am Joel K. And once again, we are going to be doing some readings from some classic public domain books and stories. Tonight, we have the opportunity to delve into two of Kurt Vonnegut's classic stories. And I'm excited to read them along with you. We were supposed to, as you guys might remember, last Sunday, my executive producer decided to break in and give me a thumbs up. Thank you. We mentioned last week there was supposed to be 3 of public domain short stories by Kurt Vonnegut. One of the 3 was taken back by the family and is back in copyright control. So these 2 that we're reading tonight are still in public domain. And for Kurt Vonnegut, who was a vocal supporter of people's rights and of the environment and did a lot of cool things in his life, it is really cool. Looking forward to sharing them with you. Don't forget, we do have a new email, and a lot of people are using it, and I thank you guys for that. JoelK_OG at protonmail.com. Let me know where you guys are watching the show from. We've had a lot of people writing in from around the country, around the U.S. We've had some people up in Canada. We've had a couple people over in the U.K. Thank you very, very much for tuning in. Greatly appreciated. As we said, we are going to be doing a couple Kurt Vonnegut. Kurt Vonnegut is one of those writers who he strove for what he wrote. He wanted to make sure that everything that he created gave purpose back. And he was an amazing writer. Kurt Vonnegut was born, as you can see there, in November 11th, 1922. He was a writer, author, and he was a soldier. He was a World War II soldier. He was captured during the Battle of the Bulge, and he is survived by also being in a meat locker of all things during the bombing of Dresden. If you guys have never heard the story of Dresden and the battles that occurred during World War II, highly recommend going into the great bombing of the military complex city of Dresden during World War II. He was captured. He was an intelligence officer, so he was transferred into Dresden to work at a malt factory, which making candy and malted milk. And his work was you know, suffered because of it after all the years in isolation and encamped during the as a POW. He worked as a reporter. He was a public relations writer for General Electric. He ran a Saab dealership, which I can't see Kurt Vonnegut writing, running a Saab dealership. His big titles were Slaughterhouse-Five back in 1969, the anti-war novel about Billy Pilgrim featuring the phase So It Goes. Cat's Cradle, 1963, a satirical exploring the intersection of science, technology, and religion. Mother Night, 1962, explores themes of hypocrisy and morality. The Sirens of Titan, a science fiction novel dealing with free will, and a book that dealt with his loss of family through divorce, Breakfast of Champions. I am going to do this, guys, because this has been bothering me the last couple shows. There we go. A little less headroom for the show. But we have two of his classic short stories tonight. The first of the two, which we will be reading tonight, is Too Bro to Be by Kurt Vonnegut. It is a story that deals with, lifespans and the future of life and immortality. Let's read this together. If you guys want to, as I've always said, if you guys want to read along, go jump into Libby or Gutenberg Project and read along. Would love to have you read along with me. But let's begin with 2BR002B by Kurt Vonnegut. Everything was perfectly well. There was no prisons, no slums, no insane asylums, no cripples, no poverty, no wars. All diseases were conquered. So was old age. Death, barring accidents, was an adventure for volunteers. The population of the United States was stabilized at 40 million souls. One bright morning in the Chicago Linning Hospital, a man named Edward K. Welling Jr. waited for his wife to give birth. He was the only man waiting. Not many people were born a day anymore. Welling was 56, a mere stripling in a population whose average age was 129. X-rays revealed that his wife was going to have triplets. The children would be his first. Young Welling was hunched in his chair, his head in his hand. He was so rumbled, so still and colorless as to be virtually invisible. His camouflage was perfect, since the waiting room had a disorderly and demoralized air too. Chairs and ashtrays had been moved away from the walls. The floor was paved with spattered drop cloths. The room was being redecorated. It was being redecorated as a memorial to a man who had volunteered to die. A sardonic old man, about 200 years old, sat on a stepladder painting a mural he did not like. Back in the days when people aged visibly, his age would have been guessed at 35 or so. Aging had touched him that much before the cure for aging was found. The mural he was working on depicted a very neat garden. Men and women in white, doctors and nurses, turned the soil, planted seedlings, sprayed bugs, and spread fertilizer. Men and women in purple uniforms pulled up weeds, cut down plants that were old and sickly, raked leaves, carried refuse to the trash burners. Never, 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 not even in medieval Holland nor old Japan, had a garden been more formal, been better tended. Every plant had all the loam, light, water, air, and nourishment it could use. A hospital orderly came down the corridor singing under his breath a popular song. If you don't like my kisses, honey, here's what I will do. I'll go see a girl in purple, kiss this sad world, toodaloo. If you don't want my lovin', why should I give up all this space? I'll get off this old planet, let some sweet baby have my place. The orderly looked at the mural, and the muralist, looks so real, he said. I can practically imagine I'm standing in the middle of it. That makes you think you're not in it? Said the painter. He gave a sarcastic smile. It's called the happy garden of life, you know. That's good of Dr. Hinz, said the orderly. He was referring to one of the male figures in white, whose head was a portrait of Dr. Benjamin Hinz, the hospital's chief obstetrician. Hinz was a blindingly handsome man. Lots of faces still to fill in, said the orderly. He meant that the many faces of the figures in the mural were still blank. All blanks were to be filled with portraits of important people on either the hospital staff or from Chicago office of the Federal Bureau of Termination. Must be nice to be able to make pictures that look like something, said the orderly. The painter's face curdled with a scorn. You think I'm proud of this daub? He said. You think that this is my idea of what life really looks like? What's your idea of what life looks like? Said the orderly. The painter gestured at a foul drop cloth. There's a good picture of it, he said. Frame that, and you'll have a picture of a damn sight more honest than this one. You're a gloomy old duck, aren't you? Said the orderly. Is that a crime? Said the painter. The orderly shrugged. If you don't like it here, Grandpa, he said, and he finished with the thought with the trick phone number the people did not want to live any more were supposed to call. The zero in the telephone number he pronounced not. The number was 2BR02B. It was the telephone number of the institution whose fanciful sobriquets included Automat, Birdland, Cannery, Catbox, Delouser, Easy Go, Goodbye Mother, Happy Hooligan, Kiss Me Quick, Lucky Pierre, Sheep Dip, Warring Blender, Weep No More, and Why Worry? To be or not to be was the telephone number of the municipal gas chambers of the Federal Bureau of Termination. The painter thumbed his nose at the orderly. When I decide it's time to go, he said, it won't be at the Sheep Dip. Ah, do-it-yourselfer, eh? Said the orderly. Messy business, Grandpa. Why don't you have a little consideration for the people who have to clean up after you? The painter expressed with an obscenity his lack of concern for the tribulations of his survivors. The world could do with a good deal more mess, if you ask me, he said. The orderly laughed and moved on. Welling, the waiting father, mumbled something without raising his head. Then he fell silent again. A coarse, formidable woman strode into the waiting room on spiked heels. Her shoes, stockings, trench coat, bag, and overseas cap were all purple. The purple the painter called the color of grapes on Judgment Day. The medallion on her purse musette bag was the seal of the Service Division of the Federal Bureau of Termination, an eagle perched on a turnstile. The woman had a lot of facial hair, an unmistakable mustache, in fact. A curious thing about gas chamber hostesses was that no matter how lovely and feminine they were when they were recruited, they all sprouted mustaches within 5 years or so. "Is this where I'm supposed to come?" she said to the painter. "A lot would depend on what your business was," he said. "You aren't about to have a baby, are you?" "They told me I'm supposed to pose for some picture," she said. "My name is Leora Duncan." She waited. "And you dunk people?" he said. "What?" she said. "Skip it," he said. "That sure is a beautiful picture," she said. "Looks just like heaven or something." "Or something," said the painter. He took a list of names from his smock pocket. "Duncan, Duncan, Duncan," he said, scanning the list. "Oh, here you are. You're entitled to be memorialized. See any faceless bodies here you'd like me to stick your head on? We've got a few choice ones left." She studied the mural bleakly. "Gee," she said, "they're all the same to me. I don't know anything about art." "A body's a body, eh?" he said. "All righty. As a master of fine art, I recommend this body here." He indicated a faceless figure of a woman who was carrying dried stalks to a trash burner. "Well," said Leora Duncan, "that's more the disposal people, isn't it? I mean, I'm in service. I don't do any disposing." The painter clapped his hands in mock delight. "You say you don't know anything about art, and then prove in the next breath you know more about it than I do. Of course the sheaves carrier is wrong for the hostess. A snipper, a pruner, that's more your line." He pointed to a figure in purple who was sawing a dead branch from an apple tree. "How about her?" he said. "You like her at all?" "Gosh," she said, and blushed and became humble. That put me right next to Dr. Hintz." "That upsets you?" he said. "Good gravy, no," she said. It's just such an honor." "Ah, you admire him, eh?" he said. "Who doesn't admire him?" she said, worshipping the portrait of Hintz. It was the portrait of a tan, white-haired, omnipotent Zeus, 240 years old. "Who doesn't admire him?" she said again. "He was responsible for setting up the very first gas chamber in Chicago." "Nothing would please me more," said the painter, "than to put you next to him for all time. Sawing off a limb that strikes you as appropriate?" "It is kind of like what I do," she said. She was demure about what she did. What she did was make people comfortable while she killed them. And while Laura Duncan was posing for her portrait, into the waiting room bound Dr. Hintz himself. He was 7 foot tall and boomed with importance, accomplishment, and the joy of living. "Well, Miss Duncan," he said, and he made a joke. "What are you doing here?" he said. "This isn't where the people leave. This is where they come in." "We're going to be in the same picture together," she said shyly. "Good," said Dr. Hintz heartily. "And say, isn't that some picture?" "I sure am honored to be in it with you," she said. "Well, let me tell you," he said, "I'm honored to be in it with you. Without women like you, this wonderful world wouldn't be possible." He saluted her and moved towards the door that led to the delivery rooms. "Guess what was just born?" he said. "I can't," she said. "Triplets," he said. "Triplets," she said. She was exclaiming over the legal implications of triplets. The law said that no newborn child could survive unless the parent of the child could find someone who would volunteer to die. Triplets, if they were all to live, called for 3 volunteers. Do the pirates have volunteers? Said Leora Duncan. Last I heard, they had 1, and they were trying to scrape up 2 more. I don't think they made it, she said. Nobody made 3 appointments with us. Nothing but singles going through today, unless somebody called in after I left. What's the name? Welling, said the waiting father, sitting up, red-eyed and frosy. Edward K. Rawling, Jr. is the name of the happy father-to-be. He raised his right hand, looked at the spot on the wall, and gave a hoarsely wretched chuckle. Present, he said. Oh, Mr. Welling, said Dr. Hens, I didn't see you. The Invisible Man, said Welling. They just phoned me that your triplets had been born, said Dr. Hines. They're all fine, and so is the mother. I'm on my way in to see them now. Hooray, said Welling emptily. You don't sound very happy, said Dr. Hens. What man in my shoes would be happy, said Welling. He gestured with his hands to the symbolism, care-free simplicity. All I have to do is pick out which one of my triplets is going to live, then deliver my paternal grandfather to the happy hooligan, and come back here with a receipt. Dr. Hens became rather severe with Welling, towering over him. You don't believe in population control, Mr. Welling, he said. I think it's perfectly keen, said Welling tautly. Would you like to go back to the good old days when the population of the Earth was 20 billion, about to become 40 billion, then 80 billion, then 160 billion? Do you know what a druplet is, Mr. Welling? Said Hines. No, said Mr. Welling sulkily. A druplet, Mr. Welling, is one of those little knobs, one of the little pulpy grains of a blackberry, said Dr. Hens. Without population control, human beings would now be packed on this surface of this planet like droplets on a blackberry. Think of it. Welling continued to stare at the same spot on the wall. In the year 2000, said Dr. Hens, before scientists stepped in and laid down the law, there wasn't even enough drinking water to go around. Nothing to eat but blue seaweed. Sorry, but seaweed. But still, people insisted on the right to reproduce like jackrabbits, and their right, for possible, to live forever. I want those kids, said Welling quietly. I want all 3 of them. Of course you do, said Dr. Hens. That's only human. I don't want my grandfather to die either, said Welling. Nobody's really happy about taking a close relative to the cat box, said Dr. Hens gently, sympathetically. I wish people wouldn't call it that, said Leora Duncan. What? Said Dr. Hens. I wish people wouldn't call it the cat box and things like that, she said. It gives people the wrong impression. You're absolutely right, said Dr. Hens. Forgive me. He corrected himself, gave the municipal gas chambers their official title, and no one ever used in conversation. I should have said Ethical Suicide Studios, he said. That sounds so much better, said Leora Duncan. This child of yours, whichever one you decide to keep, Mr. Welling, said Dr. Hens, he or she is going to live on a happy, roomy, clean, rich planet thanks to population control. In a garden that's much like the mural there, he shook his head. 2 centuries ago, when I was a young man, it was a hell that nobody could have lasted another 20 years. Now centuries of peace and plenty stretch before us as far as the imagination cares to travel. He smiled luminously. The smile faded as he saw that Welling had just drawn a revolver. Welling shot Dr. Hens dead. There was room for one more, a great big one, he said. And then he shot Leora Duncan. It's only death, he said to her as she fell. There, room for two. Then he shot himself, making room for all three of his children. No one came running. Nobody seemingly heard the shots. The painter sat on top of his stepladder, looking down reflectively on the sorry scene. The painter pondered the mournful puzzle of life, demanding to be born, and once born, demanding to be fruitful, to multiply, and to live as long as possible, to do all that on a small planet that would have lasted forever. All the answers that the painter could think were grim. Even grimmer, surely, than a cat box, a happy hooligan, an easy go. He thought of war. He thought of plague. He thought of starvation. He knew he could never paint again. He let his paintbrush fall to the drop cloths below. And then he decided he had about enough of life in the happy garden of life too. And he slowly came down the ladder. He took Welling's pistol, really intending to shoot himself. But he didn't have the nerve. Then he saw the telephone booth in the corner of the room. He went to it, dialed the well-remembered number 2BR02B. Federal Bureau of Termination, said the warm voice on the hostess. How soon can I get an appointment? He asked, speaking very carefully. We could possibly fit you in late this afternoon, sir, she said. It might even be earlier if we get a cancellation. All right, said the painter. Fit me in, if you please. And he gave her his name, spelling it out. Thank you, sir, said the hostess. Your city thanks you, your country thanks you, your planet thanks you. But the deepest thanks of all is from future generations. And that was 2BR02B. Now, back decades ago, you guys are kind of probably wondering about the name here. 2BR02B. Long before we had full 8-digit phone numbers. Oh, 7. Yeah, something like that. They had back in the 20s and the early 30s, they would have what's known as a telephone operator. And you would pick up your phone and it would connect up to a operator on the other end of the line somewhere in the city, and you would give them a certain code like 2BR02B. Example, there was an old classic 50s, 60s tune called Beechwood 45789. Same idea. And that would give the routing for the telephone operator. It was really cool. Nothing like this. Nothing like this back then. And it was all automated by having somebody sitting there pressing buttons and literally taking a plug, something like this, and just plugging it into a board and dialing that number so it could transfer from point A to point B. It was actually kind of cool. I remember very well. Well, I remember a very old phone that I received ages ago from my grandmother. She was a pretty neat lady. And so she told me about the hand crank on the phone where it would ring and it would send that signal down line. 2BR02B by Kurt Vonnegut. Hope you guys like the book. It is one of the things about Kurt Vonnegut's work is the fact that what he survived and when he survived World War II being a prisoner of war in Germany, the horrific things that he had to do. When Kurt Vonnegut had survived the bombing of Dresden in that underground meat locker, one of the things he had to do, guys, was pull the bodies out of the rubble and help bury them. Not something everybody would want to do in their life. But because he was a prisoner of war, he did as he was told. He survived. In 1945, he was liberated by the Russian army, and he got to go home. But it changed him. This story was one of those stories that allowed him to kind of bring out the stories of what he had to deal with as a prisoner of war. Our next story is one of his other more fanciful stories. This one actually has a fun title to it. The Big Trip Up Yonder by Kurt Vonnegut. I gotta thank once again my executive producer for bringing something to drink in for the throat so I can keep going and keep reading and having a good conversation with you guys. But let's continue. The next story, The Big Trip Up Yonder by Kurt Vonnegut. If it was good enough for your grandfather, forget it. It is much too good for anyone else. Gramps Ford, his chin resting on his hands on the crook of his cane, was staring irascibly at the 5-foot television screen that dominated the room. On the screen, a news commentator was summarizing the day's happenings. Every 30 seconds or so, Gramps would jab the floor with his cane tip and shout, "Hell, we did that 100 years ago." Emerald and Lou came in from the balcony where they had been seeking that 2185 AD rarity. Privacy. They were obliged to take seats in the back row behind Lou's father and mother, brother and sister-in-law, son and daughter-in-law, grandson and wife, granddaughter and husband, great-grandson and wife, nephew and wife, grandnephew and wife, great-grandniece and husband, great-grandnephew and wife, and, of course, Gramps, who was in front of everybody. All save Gramps, who was somewhat withered and bent, seemed by anti-Gerstone standards to be about the same age, somewhere in their late 20s or early 30s. Gramps looked older because he had already reached 70 when the anti-Gerstone was invented. He had not aged in 102 years since. Meanwhile, said the commentator was saying, Council Bluffs, Iowa was still threatened by stark tragedy, but 200 weary rescue workers have refused to give up hope and continue to dig in effort to save Egbert Hagedorn, 183, who has been wedged for 2 days in a... I wish he'd get something more cheerful, Emerald whispered to Lou. Silence, said Gramps. Next one shoots off his big bazoo while the TV is on is going to find himself cut off without $1. His voice suddenly softened and sweetened. When they wave that checkered flag at the Indianapolis Speedway and old Gramps gets ready for the big trip up yonder, He sniffed sentimentally while his heirs concentrated desperately on not making the slightest sound. For them, the poignancy of the prospect Big Trip had been dulled somewhat through the having to mention by Gramps about once a day for 50 years. Dr. Brainerd Keyes Bullard, continued the commentator, president of Wyandotte College, said in an address tonight that most of the world's ills can be traced to the fact that man's knowledge of himself has not kept pace with the knowledge of the physical world. Hell, snorted Gramps. We said that 100 years ago. In Chicago tonight, the commentator went on, a special celebration was taking place in Chicago Lenning Hospital. The guest of honor is Lowell W. Hins, age 0. Hins, born this morning, is the 25 millionth child to be born in the hospital. The commentator faded and was replaced in the screen by young Hins, who swallowed furiously. Hell, whispered Lou to Emerald. We said that 100 years ago. I heard that, shouted Gramps. He snapped off the television set, and his petrified descendants stared silently at the screen. You there, oi! I didn't mean to say anything by it, sir, said Lou, age 103. Get me my will. You know where it is. You kids all know where it is. Fetch it, boy. Gramps snapped his snarled fingers sharply. Lou nodded dully, and found himself going down the hall, picking his way over bedding to Gramps' room, the only private room in the Ford apartment. The other rooms were the bathroom, the living room, and the wide windowless hallway, which was originally intended to serve as a dining area, and had a kitchenette in one end. 6 mattresses and 4 sleeping bags were dispersed in the hallway and living room, and the daybed in the living room, and accommodated the 11th couple, their favorites of the moment. On Gramps' bureau was his will, smeared, dog-eared, perforated, and blotched with hundreds of additions, deletions, accusations, conditions, warnings, advice, and homely philosophy. The document was, Lou reflected, a 50-year diary all jammed onto 2 sheets. A garbled, illegible log of day after day of strife. But this day, Lou would be disinherited for the 11th time, and it would take him perhaps 6 months of impeccable behavior to regain the promise of a share of the estate. To say nothing of the daybed in the living room for M and himself. Boy, cried Gramps. Come here, sir. Lou hurried back to the living room and handed Gramps his will. Pen, said Gramps. He instantly offered 11 pens, 1 from each couple. Not that leaky thing, he said, brushing Lou's pen aside. Ah, there's a nice one. Good boy, Willie. He accepted Willie's pen. That was the tip they all had been waiting for. Willie, then Lou's father, was the new favorite. Willie, who looked almost as young as Lou, though he was 142, did a poor job of concealing his pleasure. He glanced shyly at the daybed, which would become his, and from which Lou and Emerald would have to move back into the hall, back to the worst spot of all by the bathroom door. Gramps missed none of the high drama he had authored, and he gave his own familiar role everything he had. Frowning, he running his finger along the line as though he were seeing the will for the first time. He read aloud the deep, pretentious monotone like a bass note at a cathedral organ. I, Harold D. Ford, residing in Building 257 of Alden Village, New York City, Connecticut, do hereby make, publish, and declare this my last will and testament, revoking any all former wills and codicils by me at any time theretofore made. He blew his nose importantly. And he went on, not missing a word, and repeating many emphases, repeating in particular his ever more elaborate specifications for a funeral. At the end of these specifications, Gramps was so choked with emotion that Lou thought he might have forgotten why he'd brought out the will in the first place. But Gramps heroically brought his own powerful emotions under control, and after racing a full minute, began write and speak at the same time. Lou could have spoken his lines for him. He had heard them so often. I have had many heartbreaks ere leaving this vale of tears for a better land, Gramps said and wrote. But the deepest hurt of all has been dealt to me by... He looked around the group, trying to remember who the malefactor was. Everyone looked helpfully at Lou, who held up his hand resignedly. Gramps nodded, remembering, and completed his sentence. My great-grandson, Louis J. Ford. Grandson, sir. Don't quibble. You're enough now, young man, said Gramps, but he made the change. And from there he went without misstep through the phrasing of disinheritance, causing for which were all disrespectfulness and quibbling. In a paragraph following, the paragraph had belonged to everyone in the room at one time or the other. Lou's name has scratched out and Willie's substituted as heir to the apartment, and biggest plum of all, the double bed in the private room. So, said Gramps, beaming. He erased the date at the foot of the will and substituted the new one, including the time of day. Well, time to watch the McGarvey Family. The McGarvey Family was televised serial that Gramps had been following since he was 60, for a total of 112 years. I can't wait to see what's going to happen next, he said. Lou detached himself from the group and lay down on his bed of pain by the bathroom door. Wishing Em would join him, he wondered where she was. He dozed for a few minutes until he was disturbed by someone stepping over him to get into the bathroom. A moment later, he heard a faint gurgling sound, as though something were being poured down the wash basin drain. Suddenly it entered his mind that Em had cracked up and that she was there doing something drastic about Gramps. Em? He whispered through the panel. There was no reply. Lou pressed against the door. The worn lock, whose bolt barely engaged in socket, held for a moment, and then the door swung inward. Morty! Gasped Lou. Lou's great-grandnephew, Mortimer, who had just married and brought his wife home to the Ford menagerie, looked at Lou with consternation and surprise. Morty kicked the door shut, but not before Lou had glimpsed what he had in his hand. Gramps' enormous economy-sized bottle of anti-gerasone, which had apparently been half emptied, in which Morty was refilling with tap water. A moment later, Morty came out, glared defiantly at Lou, and brushed past him, wordlessly to rejoin the pretty bride. Shocked, Lou did not know what to do. He couldn't let Gramps take the mouse-trapped anti-gerasone, but if he warned Gramps about it, Gramps would certainly make life in the apartment, which is miserable now, harrowing. Lou glanced into the living room and saw it was the Fords, Emerald among them, were momentarily at rest, relishing the botches that the McGarveys had made in their lives. Stealthily, he went into the bathroom, locked the door as well as he could, and began to pour the contents of Gramps' bottle down the drain. He was going to refill it with full-strength anti-gerasone from 22 smaller bottles on the shelf. The bottle contained half-gallon, and its neck small, so seemed to Lou, that the empty would take forever, and an almost imperceptible smell of anti-gerasone, like Worcestershire sauce, now seemed to Lou, in his nervousness, to be pouring out onto the rest of the apartment, through the keyhole and under the door. The bottle gurgled. The bottle gurgled monotonously. Suddenly he came up with the sound of music from the living room, and there murmurs and scrapings of chair legs on the floors. Thus ends the TV announcer. The 29,121st chapter of the life of Neighbors in Mine, the McGarveys. Footsteps were coming down the hall. There was a knock on the bathroom door. Just a sec, Luke cheerily called out. Desperately, he shook the big bottle, trying to speed up the flow. His palms slipped on the wet glass, and the heavy bottle smashed on the tile floor. The door was pushed open, and Gramps, dumbfounded, stared at the incriminating mess. Lou felt a hideous prickling sensation on his scalp and the back of his neck. He grinned engagingly as though nausea for anything he wanted to remotely resemble a thought, waited for Gramps to speak. Well, boy, said Gramps at last, looks like you've got a little tidying up to do. And that was all he said. He looked around, elbowed his way through the crowd, and locked himself in his bedroom. The Fords contemplated Lou in his incredulous silence a moment longer, and then hurried back to the living room, as though some of his horrible guilt would taint them too, if they looked too long. Morty stayed long enough behind to give Lou a quizzical, annoyed glance. Then he also went into the living room, leaving only Emerald standing in the doorway. Tears streamed over her cheeks. Oh, you poor lamb. Please don't look so awful. It was my fault. I put you up to this with my nagging about Gramps. No, said Lou, finding his voice. Really, you didn't. Honest, Em. I was just... You don't have to explain anything to me, hun. I'm on your side no matter what. She kissed him on his cheek and whispered in his ear. It wouldn't have been murder, hun. It wouldn't have killed him. It wasn't such a terrible thing to do. It just would have fixed him so that he would have been able to go any time God decided he'd want to. What are we going to do next, Em? Said Lou hollowly. What's he going to do? Lou and Emerald stayed fearfully awake almost all night, waiting to see what Gramps was going to do. But not a sound came from the sacred bedroom. 2 hours before dawn, he finally dropped off to sleep. At 6 o'clock, they rose again, for it was time for their generation to eat breakfast at the kitchenette. No one spoke to them. They had 20 minutes in which to eat, but their reflexes were so dulled by a bad night they had hardly swallowed 2 mouthfuls of egg-type processed seaweed before it was time to surrender their place to their son's generation. Then, as it was custom for whoever was the most recently disinherited, they began preparing Gramps' breakfast, which would presently be served to him in bed, on a tray. They tried to be cheerful about it. The toughest part of the job was having to handle the honest-to-God eggs and bacon and oleomargarine on which Gramps spent so much of his income on his fortune. Well, said Emerald, I'm not going to get all panicky until I'm sure there's something to be panicky about. Maybe he doesn't know what it was I busted, Lou said hopefully. Probably thinks it was your watch crystal, offered Eddie, their son, who was toying apathetically with his buckwheat-type processed sawdust cake. Don't get sarcastic with your father, said Em, and don't talk with your mouth full either. I'd like to see somebody take a mouthful of this stuff and not say something, complained Eddie, who was 73. He glanced at the clock. It's time to take Gramps his breakfast, you know. Yeah, it is, isn't it? Said Lou weakly. He shrugged. Let's have the tray, Em. We'll both go. Walking slowly, smiling bravely, they found a large semicircle of long-faced Fords standing around the bedroom door. Em knocked. Gramps, she called brightly, breakfast is ready. There was no reply, and she knocked again, harder. The door swung before her fist. In the middle of the room, the soft, deep, wide, canopied bed, the symbol of the sweet by and by of every Ford, was empty. A sense of death as unfamiliar to the Fords as Zoroastrianism or to the causes of Sepoy mutiny, still every voiced, slowly every heart. Odd, the heirs began to search gingerly under the furniture and behind the drapes all that was mortal of Gramps, father of the clan. But Gramps had left not his earthly husk, but a note which Lou had found on the dresser under a paperweight, which was a treasured souvenir from World's Fair of 2000. Unsteadily, Lou read it aloud. Somebody who I have sheltered and protected and taught the best I know how all these years last night turned on me like a mad dog and diluted my anti-gerasone, or tried to. I'm no longer a young man, and I no longer bear the crushing burden of life as I could. So, after last night's bitter experience, I say goodbye. The cares of this world will soon drop away like a cloak of thorns, and I shall know peace. By the time you find this, I will be gone. Gosh, said Willie brokenly. He didn't even get to see how the 5,000-mile speedway race was going to come out. Or the solar series, Eddie said with large mournful eyes. Or whether the Mrs. McGarvey will get her eyesight back, added Morty. There's more, said Lou, and he began reading aloud again. I, Harold D. Ford, etc., do hereby make and publish and declare this to be my last will and testament, revoking any and all former wills, codicils by me at any time therefore to made. No, cried Willie, not another one. I do stipulate, read Lou, that all my property of whatsoever kind and nature not be divided, but be devised and bequeathed to be held in common by my issue without regard for generation, equally share and share alike. Issue? Said Emerald. Lou included the multitude in a sweep of his hands. It means we all own the whole damn shooting match. Each eye turned instantly to the bed. Share and share alike? Said Morty. Actually, said Willie, who was the oldest one present, it's just like the old system where the oldest people head up things with their own quarters here, and I like that, exclaimed Em. Lou owns as much of it as you do, and I can say it ought to be for the oldest one who's still working. You can snooze around here all day, wait for your pension check, while poor Lou stumbles in here from work all tuckered out, and how about letting someone who's never had any privacy get a little crack at it? Eddie demanded hotly. Hell, you old people had plenty of privacy back when you were kids. I was born and raised in the middle of this goddamn barracks in the hall. How about that? Yeah, challenged Morty. Sure, you've all had it pretty tough, and my heart bleeds for you. but try honeymooning in the hall for a real kick. Silence, shouted Willie imperiously. The next person who opens his mouth spends the next 6 months by the bathroom. Now clear out of my room. I want to think. A vase shattered against the wall, inches from his head. In the next moment, a free-for-all was underway, with each couple battling to eject the other couple from the room. Fighting coalitions formed and dissolved with enlightening exchanges of tactical situations. Em and Lou were thrown into the hall where they organized others in the same situation and stormed back into the room. 2 hours of struggle with nothing like a decision in sight. The cops broke in, followed by television cameramen from mobile units. For the next half hour, patrol wagons, ambulances hauled away Fords, and then the apartment was still and spacious. An hour later, films of the last stages of the riot were being televised to 500 million delighted viewers on the eastern seaboard. In the stillness of the three-room Ford apartment on the 76th floor of Building 257, the television had been set had been left on. Once more, the air filled with the cries and grunts and crashes of phrase coming harmlessly now from the loudspeaker. The battle also appeared on the screen of the television set in the police station, where the Fords and their captors watched with professional interest. Em and Lou, in adjacent 4x8 cells, were stretched out peacefully on their cots. Em, called Lou through the partition, you got the wash basin all to yourself too? Sure. Wash basin, bed, light, the works. And we thought Gramps' room was something. How long has this been going on? She held out her hand. For the first time in 40 years, hon. I haven't got the shakes. Look at me. Cross your fingers, said Lou. The lawyer's going to try to get us a year. Gee, Em said dreamily. I wonder what kind of wires you'd have to pull to get away in solitary. All right, pipe down, said the turnkey, or I'll toss the whole kit and caboodle of you out. And the first one who lets us on to anyone outside how good jail is ain't ever going to get back in. The prisoners went silent. The living room of the apartment darkened for a moment as the riot scenes faded on the television screen. And then the face of the announcer appeared like the sun coming in from behind a cloud. And now, my friends, he said, I have a special message from the makers of anti-gerasone. A message for all you folks over 150. Are you hampered socially by wrinkles, by stiffness of joints, and discolorization or loss of hair, all because of things that came upon you before anti-gerasone was developed? Well, if you are, you need no longer suffer, no longer feel different and out of things. After years of research, medical science has now developed super anti-gerasone. In weeks, yes, weeks, you can now look and feel and act young like your great-great-grandchildren. Wouldn't you pay $5,000 to be indistinguishable from everybody else? Well, you don't have to. Safe, tested, super anti-gerasone costs you only a few dollars a day. Right now, for your free trial carton, just put your name and address and $1 postcard to mail Super Box 500,000, Schenectady, New York. Have you got that? I'll repeat it. Super Box 500,000. Underlying the announcer's words was the scratching of Gramps' pen, the only one Willie had given him the night before. He had come in a few minutes earlier from the Idle Hour Tavern, which commanded a view of Building 257 from across the square of asphalt known as Alden Village Green. He had called the cleaning woman to come straighten up the place, then had hired the best lawyer in town to get his descendants a conviction, a genius who had never gotten a client less than a year and a day. Gramps had then moved the daybed before the television screen so he could watch from a reclining position. It was something he dreamed of doing for years. Schenectady, murmured Gramps. Got it. His face had changed remarkably. His facial muscles seemed to have relaxed, revealing kindness and equanimity under what had been taut lines of bad temper. It was almost as though his trial package of super anti-Jerison had already arrived. When something amused him on television, he smiled easily, rather than barely managing to lengthen the thin line of his mouth a millimeter. Life was good. He could hardly wait to see what was going to happen next. And that, The Trip to the Big Yonder by Kurt Vonnegut. God, Gramps was a scoundrel, wasn't he? Yeah. And how many of you out there have had grandparents that sneaky and that smart, like we all have had? It was kind of funny. I hope you enjoyed the book. I hope you liked both short stories. As I said, Kurt Vonnegut is one of those that his writing and his delivery is straightforward. He is a journalist. He was a journalist. And he used that knowledge when he did his writing. His books, Slaughterhouse, was based on his survival of the slaughterhouse in Dresden. Highly recommended if you've not read Slaughterhouse 5. It is a hell of a book. If you guys get a chance, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Send me a signal, please. It would help me 110%. Now, as I always do, we usually have a final quote for the night, which we always do for both this show and the Thursday night show on Twitch. I also have something special for you. Don't forget, at the end of the month, on Memorial Day, we have something special for you. Premiering on May 25th at 10 a.m. Central Standard Time, All Quiet on the Western Front will premiere here on the channel. We will get it here and then immediately send it up onto YouTube. So both channels will get it. It's a hell of a book, or it's a hell of a book. It's a hell of a movie. It's a movie that deals with war. And when the glorification of war isn't all that it's cracked up to be. I hope you guys stop by and watch it with me. Before we go, as we do with the other show, we do a final quote for the night. And I found this, as I mentioned on Thursday, I found this and I wanted to share it with you this week. Get it all on record now. Get the films. Get the witnesses. Because somewhere down the track of history, some bastard will get up and say that this never happened. Dwight David Eisenhower, Germany, 1945. I found this quote knowing what we were going to be reading today and about all the horrors that Kurt Vonnegut had dealt with during World War II. This was Dwight Eisenhower, future President of the United States, President Dwight D. Eisenhower. What his views about what happened and the horrors that occurred. Because this kind of things happen all the time and get covered up. Kind of like they get covered up nowadays around here, around the current power that runs the craziness of Washington. Don't forget to document. Don't forget to make sure that everything stays truthful. Because sometimes they will not remember the truth. I hope you liked both of the Kurt Vonnegut books, short stories. There's a lot of Kurt Vonnegut out there. Highly recommend, if you haven't read Kurt Vonnegut before, pick up Slaughterhouse-5 as the precursor to everything that he's done. You might be pretty amazed. It's time for us to go. I appreciate everyone who stopped in. Be well, be safe, be kind. Thank you all for stopping in to Accessibly Live, the book club reading room. Every single Sunday night live here on Twitch and YouTube. All right. Recorded and sent over to YouTube. Sorry, YouTube. We are going to try to fix that so we can do it simulcast. Trying to. Be well, be safe, be kind, all. Take care of each other. Look after each other. It's getting crazy out there. We need to look after each other and care for each other. We forgot about that, and we shouldn't have to. Take care, you guys. We'll talk to you soon. See you later. See you this Thursday. See you next week for more short stories. Bye-bye.